83% of our oil, 90% of the gas, and more than 90% of the wells drilled are drilled by roughly 9,000 independent companies that average 12 employees or less.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in. All right, welcome back, Freedom Point Podcast listeners. Thank you again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point. So glad you're here with us today. I have an amazing guest with me today, RJ Burr. RJ, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jeremy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for jumping in here. A little bit about RJ. RJ is the president and CEO of Panex. He has a primary focus on the Gulf Coast investing in oil and gas. Mr. Burr's companies have raised and deployed, get this, over $300 million in upstream development and have partnered with some of the largest oil and gas companies, namely Shell, BP, and Marathon, to name a few. And he's really helped to develop something in the ballpark of several million barrels of oil reserves. RJ, help us, my listening audience, understand a little bit more about maybe your background, your backstory, and what you're currently focused on.
All right. Well, Jeremy, I was one of those guys, some kids wonder what they're going to do, and a lot of people spend decades searching for their purpose. I knew what I was going to do at 7 years old. My dad took me to the field the first time, and I saw those pump jacks, the iron horse that goes up and down. I saw them across the field. Now I was hooked. Graduated high school, funded my first program, and haven't looked back. Now, what we do when it comes to oil and gas, there's a reason Uncle Sam gives such great tax benefits. We need it. Without the oil and gas, I kind of look at it, the modern world began in 1859, and that was when we drilled the first oil well. And because that's where the foundation of the modern world's built on oil. Now, the biggest misconception out there, most people don't realize what the American oil industry is. And, take the crash here back in April of 2020. When prices crashed, if you'd grabbed the average American and said, hey, how did it affect the oil companies? Most people's first reaction would have been, well, it's Shell. Well, it's Exxon. They can handle it. When in truth, yeah, they are Shell. They are Exxon. They could handle it. Now, don't get me wrong. It hurt them, but it didn't hurt them near as bad as it hurt the American oil industry. Because most people don't realize Shell and Exxon, they're truly not American companies. Most of their production comes internationally. When you look domestic in the United States, 83% of our oil, 90% of the gas, and more than 90% of the wells drilled are drilled by roughly 9,000 independent companies that average 12 employees or less.
Wow.
That's your American oil industry. And so when those prices crashed here a couple of years ago, those were the companies that it really affected. Now, how you get involved in oil and gas, like with my company, we have specific wells that we drill, and our partners invest in those specific wells. And it's a lot of my partners are real estate investors, and the reason I love real estate investors is because real estate and oil and gas are very similar. They're not brother and sister, but they are first cousin because they're all based on one thing and one thing alone: location. And so a lot of individuals, they can get the picture of what you're talking about. Think about if you're looking at real estate and you have a four-way stop, and on one corner you have a McDonald's that's killing it. On the other corner, you have a Burger King that's killing it. On the third corner, you have a Taco Bell that's killing it. Well, what are the odds that if you put a Wendy's on the fourth corner, it's not going to do well also? It's all based on location. Well, same thing in oil and gas. If you have a well next to you that has 500 feet of pay in it, what are the odds that if you drill right next to it, you're not going to get some of that 500 feet? And so that's basically the scope of what you look at. And, everybody does different things and does it, there are 100 different ways to skin a cat. But that's the basic sum of it, is you're looking to produce oil out of the ground and sell it because it's the most precious resource we have on the planet.
I want you to help me answer something that you alluded to in this conversation so far. and that was what happened back in 2020. Back in 2020, I remember seeing on CNBC that the price per barrel of oil was $50. And then at one point, I remember seeing the futures where the price per barrel of oil went negative. Help me understand why that happened back in 2020, and really maybe just help the listening audience understand a little bit more about how the price per barrel of oil is determined, and what are some of those external factors or economic factors that play into it.
Well, that's getting heavy in the weeds in the sense that, you're looking at contracts and futures, and they were buying future oil. And think back, think on the silver crunch here a couple of years ago, when they had the silver market locked because you had, there was too much paper, not enough silver to cover. Well, that's essentially the same thing that happened in the oil industry. And when the prices crashed, the major effect really, like I was saying a minute ago, it wasn't your major oil companies. And that kind of builds into where we're at, because what we were able to do with that moment really propelled to where we are today. Because what we saw happening, and that kind of goes into my family story. We were talking earlier, and I mentioned our first life in oil and our second life in oil. Well, my first life in oil, when I first got in the business, my dad wore every hat. He was the head chief bottle washer, and everything that went on in the company, he was the straw that stirred the drink. And it was soon we realized that as successful as he was, it's next to impossible to build an efficient oil and gas company with one guy running everything. There's too many moving parts. And so immediately we broke the business up into two sides. The first side was the funding, financial, and the operations side. The second side of it was the field operations side and the geological side. And so my first day in the office, I sat down, my dad put a big phone book in front of me, handed me a script and a phone and said, have fun. And I went into the fundraising side of it. My brother, on the other hand, his first day in the office really wasn't even in the office. He was out in the field. And so in our first life in oil, we spent the next 20 years, you're never going to master anything, getting as good at our side of the business as we could. Well, that ended when Marathon Oil came in and bought my family's company. I was in my mid-30s, entered into early retirement, and took me about 3 months to realize I wasn't going to play on the PGA Tour, and took me a couple years to finally go stir crazy. And it will be 8 years ago in July that we finally reached that point. And when we got together, it was one that I kind of looked at my dad and my brother, and I said, guys, I'm going crazy. I love making my partners money. I love making money. It's time for us to crank up. And thank God that they were of the same mind. It was time to get going. Now, at that point in time, what we saw happening was, regardless of what you feel on President Trump, what he did, you can't argue with. He basically changed the power structure in the oil industry. For the last 60 some odd years, OPEC had basically set the prices. And when we started producing as much oil as we were, all of a sudden OPEC didn't have as much power. And so what we saw coming, we saw Saudi Arabia and Russia, OPEC plus, we saw them, for lack of a better term, we saw them engage in economic war with the U.S. shale industry by increasing their production. Because the whole foundation of this, if you understand that most of your shale companies were highly leveraged, meaning they needed at least $50 a barrel to pay their bills. Everything above 50 is where they made their profit. Well, if Saudi Arabia and Russia are able to push those prices down to $40, $45 a barrel, all of a sudden, those shale companies are in trouble. And so that's really what we saw coming. And when you look at our country's history and you look at all the economic crisis that we've had, and you string those stories together, there are really only two common characteristics, because in every crisis, there's a group of people that come out of the other side looking like geniuses.
That's right.
And there are two characteristics that tie these people together. The first is when the crisis happened, they were liquid. They had cash in hand and had the ability to do something. Secondly, when their opportunity presented itself, they had the courage to push their chips in the middle of the table.
That's right.
And so that's really the dynamics of what we saw right before April 2020. Yep. We were getting our powder dry. We knew the crash was coming. And then all of a sudden, COVID came in. And while the trigger was different, the result was the same. The only thing that was really different is we thought, with Russia and Saudi Arabia, we thought it'd take 18 to 24 months to play out. COVID took that 18 to 24 months and crunched it down into 30 days.
Right.
Now, what was the actual effect of that? Well, when prices crashed, you remember those independent companies that I mentioned earlier, that 12 employees or less?
Yep.
Well, the first wave wiped out were your newer companies or your companies on shaky financial ground.
Yep.
Boom, prices dropped. They were out of business. Well, the next wave came a couple of months later. Remember when we sent everybody home for COVID? The companies that could pay their employees more than the government to get them back to the field, they were the ones that made it.
Yep.
The ones that couldn't, a lot of them out of business went in their window also. And so what you had was you had a clearing of the deck that really hadn't happened in my lifetime. You had an acquisition opportunity open that it still hadn't closed to this day. We thought it would close in 22. We thought it would close when the grown-ups returned. However, we got a stalemate. And so with that stalemate, the window stayed open. And I'll tell a little funny story to kind of put a bow on that. I was at CPAC last year and had this kid from PBS walk up to me. He said, "Hey, you're the oil guy, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, who do you want to win in 24? I said, "Well, it depends on what me you ask." And I kind of confused him. He said, what do you mean? I said, "Well, if you ask the everyday guy, the guy just like you that has to do everything everybody else has to do, I want Trump to win." And the reason I do is because he understands one thing that other politicians don't. He understands that oil prices have to be such that it makes it worth the oil companies expending the risk and the money to go get it.
Yep.
However, it can't be too high that it kills the consumer. He understands that, and we had a safe equilibrium about 60 to 70. I think everybody can live there. All of a sudden, things will stabilize. Said, however, if you asked the oil guy in me who I want to win, well, heck, I want Biden to win. I want all these people to keep cussing oil and gas, keep ESG scoring it, keep running people away from it, keep pushing everybody to the hills, because while you're doing that, I'm going to keep buying, and I'm going to keep acquiring, and I'm going to keep putting those reserves in-house, because eventually the illusion will bust.
Yeah.
Eventually, people will come to realize that there is nothing out there that can feasibly replace oil right now. Just not there.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute, RJ. At the end of the day, is the U.S. and the world, we'll call it addicted to oil?
Yeah. But it's not a bad thing. When you think about it, I'm a big movie buff, and one of my favorite movies is The Usual Suspects. And one of my favorite quotes from that movie is, "The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist." Well, when I look at environmentalism, I like to modify that quote a little bit. The greatest trick environmentalists ever pulled was convincing the world that oil was bad. Look, without oil, we don't have anything. You can go grab, I would bet everything in my account. You could go randomly to any city in America and just randomly grab one person. And I would bet everything in my bank account, they will have at least 2 products of oil on them at any given time and not know it.
Right.
6,000 products from one barrel. And so when you look at, are we addicted to it? Yeah, but that's not a bad thing. Now, what is a bad thing, let me do the perfunctory. I truly do believe that everybody is environmentalist. Everybody has a little environmental streak in them. There is nothing I love more than walking out of my front porch in the morning and looking at the big field, the horses. That's manicure. Well, if that's not environmentalist, I don't know what is. It's going to be pristine. Why? Because it's mine and I want it looking good. However, if you want to save the world, which is the stated goal. However, to save the world, you're going to first have to destroy it. Well, you're not a serious person. Your argument's not valid, because that's what, for us to do what they want to do, we would have to rape the earth like we never have before. Well, don't take my word for it. Get on Google and type in oil field images, and then type in lithium mine images, and you tell me which one's destroying the earth. And so they're valid in argument. So therefore, I will not engage in that argument with them. If they want to make a realistic solution, go to natural gas. We already have the infrastructure built for the most part. You could put converters on every car. You could run natural gas straight to your garage. Boom, plug it in. It burns cleaner, hotter than anything we have. Well, there's one solution. Okay, let's discuss that. Well, you don't want to use natural gas? Let's go to nuclear. Hang on. You mean to tell me we can run the most advanced subs on the planet on nuclear, yet we can't do it here? No, their arguments are disingenuous, and they stand on the box of, "Hey, I want to save the world." Well, it's hard to argue against Santa Claus, and so that it's a false premise. And so until they want to get serious about true solutions on and fixing it, they're really not talking about the environment changing. What they're talking about is the environment changing for them. It's getting warmer where they live, or whatever. It has nothing. Look, it's solar cycles.
Yeah.
If we're causing the temperature on Earth to rise, why is Mars temperature rising? It's common sense, and they.
Yeah, RJ, this conversation is fascinating. Okay. I do have a question though for you, and that is as it relates to kind of how the oil and gas industry has evolved over time.
Mhm.
And specifically, what are some of the technologies that have been introduced to the process to make it more efficient?
You're always going to have just upgrades in technology, but for the most part, not much has really changed in what we do. Mother Nature does it all. When you hit a well, the natural pressure for the most part is going to push the oil out. If there's not pressure there, you put a pump jack on it. I mean, that's the same stuff they've been doing for 100 years. Now, when it comes to fracking, but that's just really not something that we do a lot of. And so I wouldn't want to speak in fracking just because the wells we drill, it's not required. We do something that I would love to say it's a lot sexier than it is, but we stand on the shoulders of giants and get what they left behind. And what I mean by that, like salt domes. We love salt domes. And the reason is salt domes were your original oil formations that geologists back in the Wild West days, they could identify it. Most of your original spindle tops, they were all salt domes. Well, your old oil companies are a lot like spoiled kids in that their favorite toy is their next toy. So they'd go out, they'd hit a well, they'd cut back flips. They produced a lot of oil. Over the next couple of years, they'll drill 5, 10, 15 wells around it, hit them all. They'll all be happy. Well, then all of a sudden, they'll hit a well 5 miles away. Think that they produced all the oil here, so they'll pick up and go over here. Well, over the next 60 years, another company will come and drill here. No one will come and drill here. Well, they'll produce like the field, one of the fields we have right now, the Choctaw field. This thing's produced over 30 million barrels since 1926. When we purchased it, we thought there were about 15, 20 million barrels sitting in it. Once we got done doing all of our geological work up on it, we think these guys left close to 100 million barrels sitting in place. It's $70 oil. That's $7 billion. It's going to cost us roughly $200 million to develop the whole field. Well, would you invest $200 million to make $7 billion? I will. Say we're wrong 5 times over. We've still doubled our money. Right. And so that's what we do. We go in and we find reserves that people left behind, and we develop what they left behind.
So let's talk to that passive investor that listens to this episode. Let's talk about where's the opportunity for everyday people, like myself and others, to get involved in investing passively into oil and gas.
Well, the first thing I would tell you to do, if you have no experience with oil and gas, is to go to our website, panex.us/learn. We put that page together specifically for individuals who've never invested in oil. It has Oil and Gas 101, just gives you a foundation of the oil industry. Oil and Gas 102 shows you the tax side of it. It's one of the best tax benefits out there. It's an above-line deduction Uncle Sam roughly pays for a 30-year investment. Math-wise, you put $100,000 in, you're going to get roughly a $30,000, $35,000 above-line deduction. You owe Uncle Sam $150,000, you now owe him $115,000. Now, everybody varies a little bit. I'm not a CPA. I can just give you a general rule of thumb. As a general partner, your tax benefits are against your active ordinary income. As a limited partner, a passive income, you get the tax benefits against passive income. It's whatever way is best for you. Now, what we do is we run partnerships. We run Reg D 506C partnerships. That basically means everybody that invests must be a third-party verified accredited investor. And our revenue is paid throughout the first year. We typically pay it monthly. That way the partners can see the revenue cycle. We break down where every penny went, where exactly. We have cameras on our locations where you can watch us drilling while we're drilling it. I've got one of my partners. It's kind of funny. I wait for his call, but every time we start drilling a program, I get a picture, him sitting at his desk with his feet kicked up and his TV on, and he's watching his money work. And so, that's something. This is your money we're talking about. We want you to know where we're at every step of the way. And what we'll do, like the current partnership I have, we're basically drilling 2 wells. We're directly offsetting 2 wells that we've already drilled and are in production. One well has over 300 feet of pay in it. The other well has over 100 feet of pay in it. And we're basically getting as close as we can get without overlapping our two drainage circles, and we're drilling 2 more wells. It's about as safe a well as you can drill. It's called a direct offset. Well, what should those wells do? What kind of revenue should they generate? Well, if let's be best case scenario, the world opens up, a golden goose flies over us and poops gold on our head. Well, that's the case. We'd turn 100,000 into over $1 million. Worst case scenario, we miss both wells. Other than your tax benefits, I lose everything. Do I think that's going to happen? No. But as an oil and gas guy, could it happen? Yeah, I have to say that. Realistic downside, I'd say 100,000 into 200,000, 300,000. That's if we get just a couple 100,000 barrels per well. But with the wells around us, if each one of these wells comes in at 1.5 million barrels, and let's say, heck, we do what some of those morons in DC want to do, you're going to see oil prices at 150 a barrel, 200 a barrel. No. Let's just say it gets to 100 a barrel. You have 1.5 million barrels per well. That's 3 million barrels at $100 per barrel. Those partners would make about 15 to 1 on their money.
So you're talking about a 2 to 3x equity multiple for the limited partner investor. What does that hold period typically look like? And I would presume that these are illiquid investments.
Yeah, no, they are. Now, if you have somebody who would buy it from you, yes, you could sell as long as they were accredited. And we, every now and then I've had partners buy it from other partners, but no, it is typically an illiquid investment. When it comes to the life of it, payout, I kind of look, there's 2 different ways I look at it. The first one is, how long do we think it's going to take till we get your investment back in your pocket? Best case scenario, we have your investment back in your pocket in 12 months. Worst case, upon success. Worst case, successful scenario, have your money back in your pocket in, say, 5 years.
Okay.
How long will that produce? The Blackstone number 5, which is, we're offsetting that with one of the wells in this program. That well has 11 different pay zones in it and over 300 feet of pay. Well, each one of those pay zones is essentially a well unto itself. We'll produce them one at a time. This field's average, each pay zone will typically last anywhere from 3 to 5 years. Well, if you have 11 pay zones and each one of them produce the bottom side of 3 years, that well is going to produce more than 30 years. Well, as long as that well is generating revenue, you'll be getting it. And some of these wells, in fact, this Blackstone, I'd be surprised if this thing doesn't produce 40, 50 years. I mean, it's just got that many pay sands in it. My kids will be getting oil from these fields when I'm long gone.
So let me understand this. So when you're in a position to go to your investor network to raise private equity capital from them, they're investing into a specific entity that owns a specific well. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. Each partnership is separate unto itself. And yes, you would be purchasing. Now, we have had funds where it covers, a field and they have a bunch of wells in it. But for the most part, our partnerships will be anywhere from 2 to 5 wells. But they're a specifically identified 2 to 5 wells where when you have the offering material, you have the breakdown on exactly why we're drilling these wells. Like, one of the things we love when we're talking about technology changing. When you get finished drilling the well, you drill the well, you have your open hole. You'll run a log on the well. It's basically you drop a little geophone down the hole and it takes readings. Well, that reading, that log, is done the same way today as it was done 70 years ago. And so we have this field and all this information is public data. When we purchase this field, when you hear them talk about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, that is our salt dome. We own all the mineral rights around that salt dome. Mm-hmm. Well, when we first bought it, we had our geological workup. Well, from that point, we did the legwork and we ended up going to each courthouse around there where these wells were drilled. And we collected 40,000 different data sets that have been created on this field over the last 100 years. We digitized them and put them in one spot. Well, once we laid that geological breakdown over our original geology, we went, whoa, hang on. There might be more than 40, 50 million barrels here. Well, then we got in contact with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. They shot 3D seismic over the entire thing. They needed to see where the salt ended so they could dig their caverns. We called them and said, hey, we'd like to see the 3D so we could see where the salt ends so we don't drill into it. Well, once they gave us the 3D and we laid it over top of our geology, all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, there could be 100 million barrels sitting here. And so now you have all these wells and you say have a well on the west flank of it. This well's drilled down to 5,000 feet, has 6 different pay sands in it. You have the logs, you see the logs, they look just like the logs today. But in the production report, that well just produced 100,000 barrels. You kind of scratch your head going, they had 6 good zones. Why'd they just produce 100,000 barrels? Well, then you see another well over here, same thing. Multiple zones just produced a little. Over here, same thing. Well, in the end, we have over 50 wells just like this. Well, once you start tracking their story down, you find out it's the sand. These wells produce sand. Now, think of it like this. If you're drinking a Coke and you have crushed ice in there, and you don't want that ice to get inside of your straw, well, if you stick that straw in there and you suck real hard, you're going to suck ice up in there, aren't you? So what you got to do is you kind of position that straw and you suck gently to not let that ice get in there. Well, what these old producers did is they just sucked as hard as they could. They'd hit the well, they'd turn it wide open, suck as much oil. Well, when they're sucking that oil, they're sucking the sand also. So the sand just straight up their hole, and next thing you know, their hole's done. They can't do anything. They had no idea how to deal with the sand.
Yeah.
Now we do. So we essentially have wells all over this field. I was talking to our geologist. I said, hey, Bruce, is this a good analogy? We have a treasure map, but the only difference is we have a treasure map with treasure buried all over, but we have arrows in a lot of places pointing to where the treasure's at. He said, yeah. I said, so now we just have to be good enough to get down and get it. He said, yeah, that's basically it. And so, I mean, that's what we have here. We're basically just going through a gold mine that we already know the gold's in it. We just have to do the work to get it out.
Yeah. So I know these opportunities are 506C for accredited investors only, which means that you can publicly advertise and you can talk specifically about, upcoming opportunities. Mm-hmm. So what exists right now? I mean, if there's an opportunity where I've got, some capital to deploy into the opportunity, what's the next one looking like?
That's the 2-well partnership we have right now. After that, we'll probably do another 2-well or 3-well partnership, and it'll be 3 more wells. We'll do the geological workup. Typically, what we're doing right now is, and where we're a little different, I don't believe we'll drill any wildcat wells moving forward. In oil, there's no academic pedigree stating that or covering this. This is just kind of our philosophy over the years and watching the industry. There are really 2 different kinds of oil companies. There's one oil company that is in the stage of oil called what we call chasing oil. And what I mean by that, you have John Q. Public wants to be an oil man. He finds a prospect, he raises some money, they go out and drill the well. For 99% of the people, that's the end of the road. They miss the well, they can't raise any more money, out of business. Well, for that lucky few that hit that well, they found what we call job security. Their job is secure as long as they're developing this field. Well, while they're developing it, they'll look for another lily pad. Well, a successful oil man, he looks back, he's 60, 70 years old, 80 years old. He's found 5, 10, maybe 15 of these lily pads. However, he spent his whole career chasing oil. Doesn't mean he's not good at what he does. It just means that he never found enough oil to get him ahead of the curve. He had to produce everything he had to keep the engine going. He made a lot of money. His partners made a lot of money. However, he wasn't able to build it. Well, the rarest event in oil, I believe, is when a company jumps from the chasing oil stage to the producing oil stage. Mm-hmm. And there's really 2 main differences. The first is when you're in the producing oil stage, every time you drill, you know the oil's there. Doesn't mean you're going to hit it. Doesn't mean you're going to get down. There's a lot of risk in oil. There's other things that can happen. However, you know the oil's underneath. But secondly, you have enough reserves in the ground where you can utilize those reserves to acquire more. Mm-hmm. And that's the rarest position to be in. Well, just to kind of give your audience a little idea, not to brag, this isn't the first time my family's done it. This is the second time we've done it. And so we're in the position now, every time we put the drill bit in the ground, I can look you dead in the eye and not blink when I say, if we get to total depth, I truly believe we'll put the well in production. Yep. Because we have all the wells around us telling us it's there. Right. All we have to do is go and get it. Yep. And once again, that doesn't remove all the risk. If anybody ever calls you in oil and gas and says that there's no risk, please hang up. They're lying to you. There's no way to remove all the risk. Now, what separates the men from the boys? How you manage that risk. Yeah. Am I going to put you in a position where we have a 1 in 100 shot at making 100 to 1 on our money? Or am I going to put you in a position where you got a 90% shot at making 4 to 5 to 1 on your money?
Right.
And so that it just depends. And each partnership will stand on its own. And if it doesn't, don't buy it.
Yeah.
You know, when you get down, we call it the 3 factors. When it's all said and done, the 3 factors are the first is you and your family's money. I can't tell you how much you have. If you're in a position to do it and you can, great. We'll put a positive next to it. I won't address it again. Now it's on me and my two factors. First, who are we? Jay Burr, Panex, Bo Burr, my family. Why are we the kind of people you want on your team? If you couldn't envision yourself breaking bread with me and my family, don't do it. Nope. Now, once you see that we're the kind of people you want on your team, what can we do for you economically? Of all the places in the world you can put your hard-earned investment dollars, why is this one of them? Now, at the end of it, if we have a positive on all three, we'll do business. If there's a negative on any one of them, and it could take any shape, form, or fashion you want, from I want to talk to my wife, my lawyer, risk, it doesn't matter. You follow it back down, it's going to be one of those three was negative.
Yep.
And so that's all we look for. That's why we put panex.us/learn together. We want you to see who we are, because I can sit here and spout crazy predictive numbers on, hey, we can do. But man, if I'm not somebody you should trust what I'm saying, what difference does that make?
That's right. Yep. Yeah, you absolutely have to be in a position where you not only just know, like, and trust the sponsor, but you understand that that sponsor has a tremendous fiduciary responsibility to protect your capital.
Oh.
And really, I mean, it really comes down to you and your ability, as a company to execute on not just the vision, but the business plan, and obviously reverse engineer with the end goal in mind, because your plan to turn this thing over, after 2 to 5 years.
Well, I mean, Jeremy, think about it. When somebody invests their money with somebody, most people didn't get to their position in life easy. Most people, it wasn't handed to them. Most people, they had to sacrifice. They had to miss Little League games. They had to miss dinner with the family. They had to pay a price. There's a reason you're successful. Mm-hmm. Well, when you decide to take what you paid such a price to build and give it to somebody else, that's the most sacred decision that can be made in business.
Amen. Yes.
How dare anybody take that lightly? Man, without my partners, I don't have a business. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad for us. The first question we ask, is it good for the partners? And if the answer is no, we're not going to do it. And, heck, they're too hard to find. And golly, without them, I don't have a business. Shame on me if I don't treat them right.
Well, let's talk about what's next for RJ. What's next for you, either personally or professionally? What's kind of the next, couple of years look like for you?
It's, if you'd have asked me this a couple of years ago, my answer might have been a little different, because my family's dream from the very beginning, we wanted to build an Exxon. And to do that in domestically America, that's rough. I mean, there's only been one major built in the last 40 years, and that was when two companies merged, built on American oil. And then all of a sudden, the playing field got cleared in 2020. And all of a sudden, there's an opportunity to acquire oil. Well, look, somebody's going to acquire that oil. If it's not us, it's going to be somebody. Yeah. Well, why not? If you try to build an Exxon and you end up halfway, you still built one heck of a company. And so that's really what our goal is. We want to keep acquiring reserves. In the last 4 years, we've made 23 different acquisitions. And next 5 years, heck, I want it to be 100. We want to lock down as much as we can. I want to build the biggest company we have that we can out there. Because look, COVID taught me really some key lessons. The first is, if you don't control your food, your water, your medicine, or your energy, somebody else does. Well, I can't do anything about the first three. I do know something about the fourth. And so if we can build something where you have people that actually control a large percentage of American oil, and it's people that actually care what happens to that oil, all of a sudden we've done something good for all of us. But look, I'm not Pollyannish. I'm doing this to make money. I'm doing this for my partners to make money. Yeah. And when you have the most vital resource on the planet that, well, think of it this way. 17% of the world's population currently consumes 50% of the oil produced. 83% of the world is just now beginning to use oil. Mm-hmm. What do you think that's going to do to prices?
Right.
You think they're going to choose to be in the Stone Age, or are they going to choose to move forward and live in the modern world?
No.
And so when you look at that, we're not investing enough to replace the oil we produce. Went from about $1 trillion in 2013 to roughly $300 billion this year. Right now, we're running about 10, 15 million barrels a day short of what we consume versus what we produce. They expect that to be about 30 million by 2030. Then you look at the alternative energy, there's nothing to replace oil with. Well, when you build all that together, I don't think people are going to stop using oil.
Yeah.
And so prices really only have one way to go. I mean, it's You listen to 100 different talking heads and they try to be the smartest person in the room by changing what they're saying. But man, when you break it down, 1 + 1 will always equal 2.
Yeah.
And if you have a product that everybody wants and everybody needs and there's not enough of, it's going to cost to use it.
Yeah.
And we're all in the oil business, whether you want to be or not. We all pay for it. And I just know that I'm one of the few avenues out there that I can actually get the flow of that revenue going the other way. If we're all going to be in the oil business anyway, you might as well make some money and save some money on your taxes while doing it.
Yeah, amen. This, RJ, has been a very intriguing conversation and definitely a shift from the typical types of conversations that we have on this show. Nonetheless, incredibly important because after all, the name of this podcast is The Freedom Point. And you've given us a lot to think about, in that way. Can you maybe share with our listening audience as we draw to a close here, a few different ways that we can reach out to you to learn more about what you're up to?
Oh, yeah. Like I said a minute ago, the first is panex.us/learn. There'll be a little page where you enter your name, and we're the only people that see it. We don't, our lists are, they're our life. We don't let anybody see those lists, and so they come straight to us. Second, email me, RJ Burr at panex.us. I'm wide open. That's probably the easiest way to reach me. I have my phone on me at all times. And so, it's just one that, or hell, give me a call. It doesn't have gun, will travel. That's all I do. I know that I give my partners, there's really only 2 guarantees I give them. One, if you ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, I guarantee I'll find it for you. And 2, if you call me and by chance I don't answer, I'll call you before I go to bed that night.
Yep.
And so other than that, I come early, I stay late, and keep my head down, tail up, and plow until corn starts growing.
Sounds good. Well, we will put your contact information in the show notes for this episode. Again,
Terrific.
Really appreciate you jumping into the conversation today, RJ.
No, Jeremy, it was my pleasure.
Absolutely. And Freedom Point podcast listeners, thank you again for joining us on another episode of The Freedom Point. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.